Hold on to your chairs, folks. The WGA has reached a deal with the big execs over in Hollywood. Supposedly now the writers are going back to work, except there's one little snafu. That's right, ratification has not yet occurred. What does it mean? Well, those writers, those pesky writers, they have to now agree to the terms. Those terms which are not yet publicly known. And, according to one of our experts, it may be harder to get ratification this time than ever. Well, they've been up late into the night, folks, working on negotiations between the WGA, Writers Guild of America, and all of those big corporations out there that, well, they make the entertainment that you supposedly enjoy. One of those individuals out there who is a part of this process is the Script Doctor, who joins us yet again on the channel. Script, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, bro.
Pleasure as well. And folks, we endeavor to explain entertainment, keep you ahead of the culture curve. However, Script, for those out here who are new to the channel and listening in, perhaps for the first or second time, can you give us just a brief rundown of why you are the type of person who can give us a good explanation of what's going on with the WGA? What's your background, I guess, in essence?
Well, I've been a professional screenwriter for a little bit over 17 years. I've worked in Hollywood, among other entertainment businesses throughout North America. I am pretty familiar with how the guilds work, being a member myself on occasion. I'm going to give you full disclosure. You don't retain WGA membership permanently when you become a member. You have to earn it by earning units every 3 years or so in order to maintain status. With the pandemic having in there, I didn't make my units, so I'm not the associate member I used to be as a Canadian citizen. So I'm a little at arm's length to a degree from the guild, but I still have many, many friends that are involved in the guild that have been coordinating with me, helping me out when it comes to understanding what's going on, what's going to be coming up in regards to this strike here. And why I am a good source with regards to understanding this stuff is because I have the advantage of not living inside the Hollywood bubble all the time. Being a Canadian citizen, I'm able to come and go a lot more freely. So I'm able to interact with a regular audience and the general public in a far less filtered environment. And from that point on, I'm able to translate some of the inside Hollywood talk to normal verbiage for all of you guys out there to digest, whether you care about the strikes or not.
There you go. And folks, full disclosure, we also have another source who is not appearing in the video, who has or is a high-level individual inside one of the unions. We will leave that up to the imagination about how high level it is, but it's way up there. All right, so let's get into this. Script, I think that sets the table for why you and I can have a meaningful conversation about what we're doing. This out of TMZ, Writers Guild of America, Wayne Studios' best and final offer. Oh, it's the big one, amid ongoing strike talks. The latest round of negotiations between the WGA and the AMPTP is said to be wrapping up soon, with either an agreement to end the strike or a signal to hit the picket lines again. Leadership from both parties, including a reported handful of high-profile CEOs from the major studios, have been hashing out a new deal over the past several days, which has crept into the weekend and into the wee hours of the night. But, Script, one of the things that many out there don't know and is not being reported very often is that it's not just that an agreement has to happen here. There is also a ratification process. So can you talk to us about what the ratification process is? And do you think that that might also be a hiccup in what we eventually get to being a successful return to work?
Yes. So when the WGA, when the negotiating team feels like they've got a strong deal when it comes to this next 3 years in the industry, they present that to all the union guild members, and they vote yes or no on it to agree to this deal. And questions are usually answered and divulged. Exploration with regards to all the line items in the deal are examined, and then the union members vote whether they want this deal is the best for them or not. And if they vote that is the best for them, if the vast majority, I can't remember the exact percentage. I don't think it's a 50-50 or 51-49 type of thing. I think it's more than that. But if I am wrong, please someone up there correct me.
So you think there needs to be a super majority of some sort to get the approval in?
Yes. That would be the most ideal conditions, especially for the union, because in my understanding of that, if you have it as a close divide, that means you're going to have a lot of contention within the union for the next few years anyways. And of course, the union doesn't want to have that going on in addition to their other responsibilities at the same time. So ideally, they're looking for a majority vote in favor of a good deal if the negotiating committee convinces the WGA members that it is a good deal. Once that is done, the contract is ratified. This can take up to a few days or a few weeks after the deal has been presented to the union. And then from that point on, once that's ratified, they go back to working with the struck companies. And that is very different with regards to other studios. Again, the strike is only affecting the studios that are considered struck companies. And those are named of Paramount, Universal, Warner Brothers, Disney, Sony, Amazon, and Apple. Anything else that makes movies, whether they're independent or whatnot, are not part of the struck companies, then are therefore not subject to this type of thing. However, they will be subject to following the contracts of the WGA if they hire union employees.
Understand. Now, Script, in the past, it has felt like when we reach one of these deals that it's something that's going to hold the industry together. It's going to be connective tissue that keeps the studios, corporations, writers, actors, etc., all on the same page for 10 years, 15 years, maybe even 20 years before another strike occurs. In this case, things feel more tenuous. It feels as if whatever happens could be sort of a ceasefire for the time being, but not something that is quite so permanent. Part of the reason here is that even if there is ratification, artificial intelligence looms large over all of this, and it feels as if everybody involved still has no good grip on what artificial intelligence could be in the very near future, and therefore they don't even know how to sort of write into the parameters of how it will exist in the industry, if at all. The other issue here is that over the last, the entire existence of the industry, it was well understood how you made money. You made money through advertising. You made money through the box office. You made money through contracts. And you made money through redundant markets. So, for example, after a movie leaves the box office, it went to VHS, or it went to DVD, or it went to Blu-ray, etc. Today, it's not so clear-cut because of streaming. People are paying a subscription to many different streaming services, and then they watch stuff, but it's not well known how the correlation there happens, and then it's not well known exactly how much money should be awarded to people who participated in any given show. Everybody's struggling with this, and it also feels as if the death of physical media has been the death of a whole lot of capital. And so those cash flows are not the same as they once were. The pie is nebulous now. And I think that has given major uncertainty to everybody involved that this deal may not hold for a very long time. What are your thoughts on how long this might go before we're into another pickle within entertainment?
Personally, I hope it doesn't come up sooner. I don't hope there isn't a
Yeah.
strike in another 3 years.
It's not good for
Because
people if it comes back up soon.
Yeah, I will say this, every negotiation that occurs after a strike is resolved, it's really there to build a more solid foundation for the next set of negotiations. And some things that have been made in a previous deal might carry over to the next one. They might be upgraded, changed, or modified. When it comes to with generative AI and also the secondary markets or secondary windows of distribution, the studios have been Trojan horse by big tech when it comes to streaming. Primarily with Netflix. Now, Netflix does sort of try to say that they're a studio, but they behave very much like a tech company.
Right.
And that model has bamboozled the studios, thinking that they could have their own personal Netflix. And that has led to the decline in physical media. Right now, I think there's a sizable portion of people, not just in the studio system, but also on the talent side of things, that are hoping that this decline is a hiccup of sorts, that it will eventually bounce back because there's value not just in the physical media for the customers at home, but the entire overhead and distribution model that it has allows to generate more cash. And I think it's taking them a lot longer than ideal for them to realize this. So, yeah, I think because there's all that ambiguity with regards to generative AI, streaming itself, and how it pertains to the physical market and the cash flow of those distribution models, it's causing a lot of people not wanting to jump to any sort of conclusion or be too speculative about the future, because we don't know what could happen in the next 3 to 5 years that could actually change the game all over again.
Script, I want to give some credit to Dr. Michael, who is the chief editor over on thatparkplace.com. He was showing me what the new artificial intelligence tools can do with Photoshop now. It's very amazing. I mean, it's up there with Midjourney. Now, there are techie people out there who will listen and say, "Oh, come on, pro, I know way more about this, and one is better than the other," or whatever. Suffice to say, I was impressed, and I'm impressed with what Midjourney does and other generative AI systems. But one of the things that was pointed out to me that's so fascinating is I had never thought of this before, but as we see in these still images, artificial intelligence insert things that look very credible and defy what is real and what isn't real, even in still photography. It begs the question: how long until this is fully embraced into motion videos, of course, and in motion pictures? And then the question becomes, Script, what happens to extras, for example, if there's no need for extras any longer because you can just insert them through artificial intelligence? And you start thinking about all the ways that this can really enrapture the industry. And I don't know where this goes. I think that's the difficulty in it, is that there's an event horizon around artificial intelligence that it's so difficult to wrap your arms around to write the language necessary. And you can kind of understand why lawyers would be really struggling with this concept, as well as how this could be a difficult ratification process. Do you see any issues there?
I see a lot of issues there, not just on the economic side of things, but also on copyright side of things. One of the ways that studios and anyone who creates an IP makes money is through licensing it out. And if you're creating it with the assistance of AI, some courts have already made decisions that AI cannot be copyrightable, which means that you end up compromising any new IP you try to develop with the use of AI.
But is that only when the AI is in whole the generative entity, or does that apply does it apply if AI is only a partial factor? Because and let me say why that's an important question. I think artificial intelligence is going to become ubiquitous to the point that you don't know where it is and where it isn't any longer, and so that would create a massive legal mess, I think, if anything that features artificial intelligence is therefore not able to be copyrighted, patented, trademarked, etc.
Yeah, that's the type of language that's still up in the air as far as I'm aware of in the course. It's like, well, how much AI in your work is acceptable under a copyright law, and how much like what is a threshold, right?
Right.
Because you never know. There might be something where you might do. So we have what's in the industry called special effects plates. And they're basically just something you put in the background or foreground that covers up something or is used as a marker for special effects. Let's say you want to do a very unique looking sky, and you want to be able to do it quickly and effectively in your shot, and it's a live action shot. Everything else is practical, but you're replacing the sky with something else. Well, you could probably do that with a generative AI rather quickly and rather effectively. And the question being is like, okay, well, that saves you some time and money, but now that we've used it, are we subject to not being able to retain the copyright on it? And that's something I think that is a very important question that will have to be decided first and foremost on the creative side of things, and then have it be brought forth legally to see if there's actually any credence to that to protect that use in that particular in
Sure.
particular shot.
And at the most fundamental level, you would have to say that a grammar checker or a spell checker in a word processing program, it is a rudimentary version of artificial intelligence. We've all been using that forever, so it gets really tricky about where that line is. What is the stuff that we've been using forever and is embedded into our society? And what is this new artificial intelligence that we don't like? Now, I understand that spell check and grammar checks, those are probably not generative, but you could argue that, well, maybe they are because they're generating proper language for you.
Well, it's different because it's not so much a generation as it's a cross reference, and that's where that comes into regards to like the semantic stuff, where it says where it's a matching game essentially. That's what the spell checker is usually doing, and grammar checker to a degree is also a matching game as well.
Yes,
It's
yes.
primarily just saying, okay, we know this isn't correct, and then these are the suggestions. And here's the other part too with spell checker: you get to pick whether or not you want that changed or not. It doesn't do it for you when you just click the spell check. It just
Right.
highlights what it is and it provides you suggestions.
And
So
the
the
counter
choice is
argument
still
there is going
yours.
to be that Chat GPT would be the same for a script, because somebody's going
Yeah,
to say, well, I had it write me 10 and I picked the one that I like best. And then I changed it the way that I wanted it. And the judge is going to say, "Well, I don't know anymore what the heck this is." And so that's
And that's the other
that's
part
what
too.
everybody's going through right now in these rooms.
Exactly, and that's the other part too. Um, and it's also the double-edged sword of the courts, which is that if you're dealing with a new technology that is beyond the frame of reference of the judge or the judges involved, you now are in a very dicey situation because they could actually end up making a decision that is very detrimental to their own personal ethics as well as with their responsibilities to the court. To the court, um, how do you reconcile that? How do you make sure you are able to argue enough for that in a way that whoever is hearing this case or hearing the argument understands the gravity of the situation and why it needs to be taken with great care. Um, because yeah, there's definitely advantages with AI. It's not stopping anytime soon. The best thing that you can do is try to put in regulations, not to stop it, but to make sure that it doesn't really become abused. And that's the other part too. Is I think a lot of
Sure.
people in Hollywood, especially some of the veterans that have been there for over 40 years, are looking at AI the same way they are looking at digital effects and compositing as it started to explode in the 80s. They are worried that it's going to be abused and that what you're going to end up having is a series of movies shot in either the volume or shot in a contained area with a digital background being replaced. And it's not going to have the level of interactivity that we normally can recognize with our talent while we're seeing them on screen. And society has already proven that they've developed an eye to spot what is computer generated or computer animated images in special effects. It is only natural that eventually you will have that same thing for AI. No matter how convincing it's going to be, there's always going to be something in the back of our mind that's
There's a
going to say
lazy
there's
eye on the
something wrong
extra.
here. Well, it's just like what
And
happened
he's
when they
like, "Well, that's
started.
artificial intelligence. I know
Oh
that
yeah.
one."
We've already got a little bit of proof of this because we've already had examples where people have been subjected to 8K and 12K resolution,
Yeah.
and the eye doesn't. It's like it's too much for the eye to actually process and understand, to the point where they see no difference between 4K, 8K, and
Well,
12K.
you need like to see 8K, you need like a 100-inch screen, and you need to be like 5 feet away from it. So what's the point then?
Exactly. It's so hyper detailed that even in that hyper level of detail, the human mind says there's something not right here. It just triggers a red flag for us.
Right,
AI
and then
will
you
eventually go to that point, I suspect, because there are going to be certain things that we as a species are recognized as human that a machine, no matter how much we feed into it, might not be able to fully 100% replicate. And yes, it will fool probably a sizable portion of the population, but not enough for people to be like, hey, as soon as I point that out, everybody else is going to see it and know exactly what that is fake. Um, and
the technology, it seems to me, exists that if you were to turn on a football game on the Xbox One X, or you were to turn it on the PlayStation 5, it seems to me we should be really close now to where it looks like the real thing, and yet it
Mhm.
doesn't. And if you took it back to somebody who had not seen a video game, and you took it back to the 1980s and showed it to somebody, they would say, seeing it on a 4K television that didn't exist at the time, they would be blown away. And
Yes.
yet it still would not look like regular football, because there's some kind of difference there. And maybe one day we'll get to the point where these things are so indiscernible that you can't tell the difference. But it's a long way off even for CGI, and that's been around much longer than artificial intelligence. So I'm
Almost
I'm
40
rather
years. Yeah.
convinced by your argument. But I do want to finish up with one last point here, Script, and
Sure.
that is one of the major contentions has been minimums for the writing rooms. Talking about you've got to have so many people working on a project. Um, talk to us a little bit about why that has been important this time around. Like, why is that even an area of contention?
Well, that's a great question. So this pertains primarily to mini rooms. Now, for those out there that are not sure, familiar with the term, a mini room is basically a room devised for a mini series, so between 6 and 8 episodes, sometimes 10. And it was initially pitched a few years ago as in just a shorter writer's room for a television show. It functioned just like a normal writer's room, except to be just a bit more condensed. Pay is on scalable with regards to the condensed timeframes and so forth. That was how it was pitched, and it was done so in between contracts, if I'm not mistaken. And that's why it didn't come up with regards to the 2019 negotiations. And what ended up happening is that the mini room model ended up hiring writers, having them work in a condensed environment for decent pay at first, and then the show would either be greenlit and put into production or it'd be scrapped. And here's the other part too, is that whatever they developed in that room that was scrapped, they could not retain ownership of it. So they couldn't pitch it to another studio. So they couldn't actually get any work out of that future. And in addition, certain stipulations were put in place with regards to, well, you don't need 6 writers to write 6 to 8 episodes of a television show. You could probably do it with like 2. And it was not up to the discretion of the showrunner to do it as well. And in the case of Disney, they're the ones that did the mini rooms the most, when it was the case of Disney, they wouldn't actually hire a showrunner. They would appoint their executive producer, in this case, for Marvel, who'd been Kevin Feige. He would be the executive producer and take the role of the showrunner in essence, and then he would hire a head writer to lead a mini room of that writer and maybe another writer or 2 others, and they would work on one of their Marvel television shows that they were going to be releasing on Disney Plus. And it was so condensed. It also restricted those writers from learning about production, or at least getting involved in production, which is a very vital part of a typical television show. And also with post-production, talking to directors and editors to make sure that their story is as well refined as possible to satisfy the audience's needs and the intentions of what they want for the show. And these mini rooms have now been exploding on the scene, and it's actually been causing a lot of gap in work between writers, because you end up working in a mini room for anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, and then you do the complete show in that 6 to 8 weeks time as a writer, and then you're off to find another job. And a lot of people that are unaware about this in Hollywood is that the writing part, the acting part, the directing part, that's not really the job. That's just the perk. The job itself of those talent is finding the work, is finding the privilege to be able to do those things. So that's going to meetings, negotiations, pitching, trying to sell your idea or trying to sell your take on an assignment job. And so the mini room has actually condensed that to the point where you spend 6 to 8 weeks working on a show that will probably go into a production for maybe 3 or 4 months, but you're not able to participate in that as you would normally do on a regular show. And so you're working 6 to 8 weeks, decent pay, and then you have to jump off to find another job. And you might either find another show, you might sell a screenplay, or you might end up in another mini room. But mini rooms aren't the majority. There's a lot of them, yes, but they're not the majority, and they're only that one part of the year. Once it's done, it's done. And if it comes back, it might come back next year for the next season. It's all up in the air. Nobody really understands what's going on. It's all got a bunch of strange rules. And what the WGA has proposed is that if you're going to do a mini room, they want to make sure that, number one, it allows them to hire your average amount of writers that you would have on a normal television show. Now, I personally do not like a compulsion of minimums or maximums when it comes to a writer's room, but this is what has been proposed with the WGA. And the intention is, number one, the mini room is not really going to be a mini room anymore. You're going to have a minimum staffing, and it's going to extend longer than the 6 to 8 week period. And it's also going to allow the showrunner and one writer to actually be involved in the production and post-production process so that they can better develop their skills as a writer and producer that they can carry over in either a following season of that show or to another show, possibly with the same studio or network. That is the spirit of what they're trying to do. And basically the studios are not very happy with that, because the mini room is a very cost-effective way to get content out for the streaming service. But if you're a customer out there subscribed to something like Disney Plus and we're fans of Star Wars and Marvel, you can see the horrible after effects of a mini room, and the fact that all of those shows you watched that you probably didn't like were part of a mini room. And the Writers Guild of America is trying to propose, hey, we might be able to increase the quality if we actually have a proper team for the show at the ground level that carries it through to the end, as opposed to what you've been getting now. That is their argument.
Is there any argument then, Script, that the market would naturally cause these companies to have to bring in more writers if left to the market's own devices? The audiences out there would begin to diminish the ROI unless the studios brought in more quality, and therefore the union is a bit superfluous in this area? Or do you think that the unions are a necessary component for facilitating more quality individuals being participatory in the process?
That's a really good question. I would say that I think the unions, it's not so much in regards to increasing the quality, but it's kind of sending a message that you are seeing failure in your shows that the studios are trying to probably blind themselves to. I mean, it's goes without question. You guys have been reporting that there's been declining ratings, especially between Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett. Positivity on Miss Marvel ratings, and Hawkeye and WandaVision and Loki and all those shows.
Things are
They
not
have not
well at
been
Disney,
growing.
suffice to say.
Yeah, they have not been growing, and I think what this request, this proposal from the WGA is kind of saying is like, listen, you're not going to probably listen to us saying that these shows are terrible. Maybe if you help us get some other voices in the room, that might end up saving your show. And that might be one argument they're going for. Again, I don't agree with the minimum or maximum staffing. I'm trying to get into the heads of what this negotiation tactic would be to say either, if you want these shows to be good, this is kind of how you make them good. And the stuff that they're asking that the mini room be modified to is more in line with the traditional television show, which prior to streaming and prior to the miniseries, you were writing between 13 and 22 episodes a season, and you had to do it constantly, and you had to do it well in order to justify a renewal and to justify people's interest. And with Netflix recently acquiring Suits and that exploding on their streaming service, and that's a show that hasn't been on the air for quite some time, it's kind of showing like, hey, take a look at this show that has this model that is now very lucrative for Netflix right now. Why don't you incorporate this model to the mini room with a slight set of adjustments to maintain the mini room status? And maybe you'll start to get a quality that would be able to compete with something like Suits. That is probably the subtext that is being put forth with that, in a way that the studios would digest and not have to admit that they screwed up with the mini rooms. But this is all speculation on my part. Again, it's a very difficult thing to do, because ideally you want writers to be working, and a lot of writers don't work and some of them lose union status. Some of them are barely able to retain it. And on top of that, even though they are big paychecks, they're few and far between, especially on a streaming service, because again, how many months elapse between the end of season 1 and the start of season 2 when it comes to a streaming show? In the case of The Mandalorian, we'd have a full year, or in some 2 years between seasons 2 and 3. That's a long time for writers to have to wait to come back to work on a show that they've been hired on, is it not?
Those are all good points. I do want to say, lest the audience think that I've gone soft, that I also have to insert here that for both the studios and the writers, much of their problems would evaporate if they would cease to seek out ideological and propagandistic sort of messages and go back to more universal storytelling with the kinds of truths that we can all adhere to and celebrate. So I think that also is a factor in all of this. But Script, I am so pleased that you came and joined us and had just a fascinating conversation. I love this conversation. I hope folks out there did as well. Script, where can people find you if they would like more of these high-level discussions?
Well, you can find me on Twitter X at ScriptDoctorPhD. You can also find me on my own YouTube channel, youtube.com/thescriptdoctor. And I have a Patreon where I talk a little bit about these things. I also talk about writing tips and advice to get to exactly the point that you just made, one that I wholeheartedly agree with, which is messages should not be the forefront of your story. You should go to traditional storytelling and make it very much something universal to adhere to. And if there is a message, let that be a very low-level byproduct or afterthought of things, as opposed to being some sort of ideological preaching, because people have other places where they can be preached to, not in their entertainment, not in their media, not in their art or their video games. Those things should be to enrich people and not make them feel bad.
Enrich and escape, not to be harangued and annoyed by the latest in whatever our world is into. Folks, we talked about the ratification process. It's time for the ratification of this video. The way you do it is, if you liked it, click the like button, share, subscribe, and you can click it, stick it to the algorithms. It's the notification bell. Drop a comment down below. This should not just be two people having a conversation. Instead, it is indeed a dialogue with all of you, a community conversation. So, drop a comment down below. We covet those comments and we care about what you think. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
This is Wilton the Troll reporting for That's Park Place, and I'm surrounded by loving and adoring people who are peacefully trying to make sure that poor kids aren't cold in the winter. And just behind me, you can see a totally natural bonfire for baking cookies or making marshmallows.
Yeah, so, Wilson, we really appreciate the effort and stuff, but we're looking for real and, accurate news reporting on that Park Place.
So not like most news outlets, huh?
No.